Theodore Suess Geisel, commonly known as Dr. Seuss, was born in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1904. World War I and the Prohibition created hardships socially and financially, considering his father and grandfather were brewers and his family consisted of many German immigrants. He made advertisements for Standard Oil for the first 15 years of his career, created political cartoons for PM magazines, and training videos for the U.S. Army. I thought this slide was humorous because the U.S. is said to be following isolationism. However, due to their support for the Allies, the U.S. actually isolated Japan economically by putting embargoes, which are partial or complete prohibition of trade and commerce, on Japanese goods. In their practice of isolationism, previously, the U.S. practiced the Lend-Lease policy in 1940 as a way of being a neutral country by giving tanks, planes, and ships for no cost to the Soviet Union and asking the wartime machinery, if they worked after the war, to be returned. One day after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, December 8, 1941, Franklin Delano Roosevelt declared war on Japan. Less than a week later, the U.S. declared war on Germany and Italy on December 11, 1941. 6 months later, as not only a supporter but a member of the Allied forces, the U.S. declared war on Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania. As an Axis power surrounded by Allied forces, Nazi Germany had to deal with Western allies including France, Britain, and the U.S., as well as the Soviet Union on the east. Multiple battles took place in other countries such as Libya. The Treaty of Versailles had previously crippled their military force. Fuel shortages and an increased need to defend their territory led to Germany's loss in the war.
The next political cartoon was published on January 22, 1942. Dr. Seuss is basically explaining the advancing technology of Germany. So the Germans were using new technology that the U.S. hasn't seen before. For example, the doodle bug, aka the buzz bomb, was one of Hitler's vengeance weapons during World War II. The next political cartoon was published on January 23, 1942. Dr. Seuss is illustrating how the Nazis' empirical advances in South America. As you can see on the picture, you see Hitler walking in the road where you see two flags that represent Chile and Argentina because they were the target countries to conquer during that time period. The next political cartoon was published on January 27, 1942. Dr. Seuss is showing us Australia's involvement in the war. Australia entered the war after the invasion of Plan. Being part of the Allies, Australia played a key role in the Pacific War, making up the majority of Allied strength in the Southwest Pacific. The next cartoon was published on February 4, 1942. Dr. Seuss portrays MacArthur as one loyal, good role model for Philippines during World War II. The Bataan Death March, Japanese attacked the Philippines in a war crime battle. MacArthur helped the Philippines by holding off Japanese troops to enter the country. The next illustration was published on January 28, 1942. Dr. Seuss is describing the General Erwin Rommel's role in World War II. As one of Germany's most respected military leaders, he led the Nazis in many battles, such as the Alamein, where he got his nickname the Desert Fox because this battle was fought in the deserts of North America.
In this cartoon, the tanks represent the discrimination Jews and African Americans face. Employers even had the right to discriminate them as well. They also were given unimportant military jobs during World War II. In the next slide, African Americans were ignored and discriminated by the war industry. Uncle Sam is trying to convince him that if blacks and whites work together in true harmony, it would be very beneficial for the war effort, and it would help the Allied powers win this war against Germany and the Axis powers. In the next slide, the Battle of Midway was a naval battle fought a few months after Pearl Harbor with a U.S. victory. And Japan was no longer the dominating force at sea because of their loss. Now the Allied powers had more control at sea, and the sea creature in this cartoon represents Japan. In the next slide, Hitler is singing a song about keeping Jews in concentration camps. The sport he is referring to in the song is the mass murdering of Jews. The other man, Laval, was France's prime minister during Germany's control over France. He approved of the mistreatment of the Jews, and he was aiding Hitler during this war. In the next slide, it talks about Operation Lentil, which was when the Soviets from North Caucasus to Siberia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan were deported. Many died during this deportation that Lenin approved of in 1944. These people were not able to return back home until 1957.
During the war, the German citizens were actually not treated very well because they put all the resources into the war. In this picture, these Germans are portrayed as monsters who eat countries instead of food. Dr. Suess uses the demonization technique in this propaganda. This one talks about the Battle of Stalingrad. In this picture, this German person announces that they would not have their victory parade that was scheduled since they lost to the Russians. Dr. Suess makes fun of their loss because this battle was a turning point for the Allies. This one talks about the Battle of Midway in the Pacific. This Japanese person reports back saying that they lost 40,000 men in the battle and it was really embarrassing for them. This is also Dr. Suess's way of making fun of their loss. So the US ended isolationism as they entered World War II. However, some people actually wanted to go back to isolationism after the war. Like in this picture, a man is giving an isolation lollipop to a baby to try to gain support back. However, that never worked out. So many of Dr. Seuss's political cartoons were actually published because they were so significant, because they influenced how people viewed the war during that time. And even today, we still study these political cartoons to see how propaganda was used during that time.